Okay, so it's about time that we took a look at least one of the video games that make up the bulk of WayForward's library of games. Licensed video games.
From Disney's Mickey Mouse and DuckTales to 20th Century Fox's Aliens and Warner Bros. Looney Tunes, they've covered a cornucopia of pre-established franchises in between their various video game revivals and original creations. While licensed video games are often associated with the very worst that the medium can offer, and rightfully so, given how often development times are rushed in order to meet a deadline like a television show's new season or an upcoming movie that pushes quality control to the side, in addition to infamous standouts like Superman 64 and Thundercats on the DS, WayForward can boast that they've made a fair number of worthwhile ones, like Wendy Every Which Way on the Game Boy Color, and Batman the Brave and the Bold for the Wii and DS.
I already talked about two of them in my previous reviews on Alien Devastation and Adventure Time. Hey King, why'd you steal our garbage? However, today's game has nothing to do with phallic-shaped monsters or the equivalent of SpongeBob SquarePants' imagination being let loose by powerful undersea narcotics.
In 2007, Disney decided to build on the relationship with Sega by giving them the rights to create and publish video games based off of the Marvel movies, including Iron Man, The Incredible Hulk, Captain America, and of course, Thor!
Side note, thanks for making me have to watch Thor again as a part of research for this video. Yeah, not a fan of Thor, sorry. It's not a very good Marvel movie.
The Thor video game was developed by Liquid Entertainment on the 360 and PS3, while WayForward was tapped to make the handheld version of Thor: God of Thunder.
Well, one of the handheld versions. See, the Thor video game also had a PSP version in the works, being made by Red Flag Studios, the same people who brought the Thor video game to the Wii. However, for whatever reason, I haven't been able to find out exactly why, that version of the game was scrapped, and instead a 3DS Thor video game was released in September of the same year as the earlier released versions. Because why not? At this point in time, 2011 was already an abysmal year for the 3DS, outside of eShop offerings, one of which we might be talking about later this week, so it's not like the release of the Thor 3DS game would have made the year that much worse.
The game's story is completely unrelated to the movie, which is probably for the best, opening with an invading army of trolls. Wishing to protect Asgard, Thor and Loki set out to stop the troll invasion while facing down several of their comic counterparts' classic villains in an even more classic genre. The gameplay is your basic side-scrolling beat-em-up, with Thor being forced to face foe after foe before moving on to the next part of the level and finding new runes to equip that grants them useful abilities or increases their capability to take or deal out damage. It's simple, but there is something to be said about how faithful the combat has been designed to recreate the titular character's various powers and moves. From throwing Mjolnir across the screen, to tearing apart massive columns to use as a weapon, to lifting up foes both small and large before tossing them with ease, or crawling down the very elements of the earth to wipe out every single one on screen, it is incredibly authentic, meticulously detailed in how it makes you feel every bit as powerful as the God of Thunder himself when you're not composed to the ground with a single blow. Unfortunately, its faithfulness is the game's most grand downfall. Keeping in spirit with how almighty Thor is, every fight turns into an altogether unchallenging brawl with little strategy beyond mashing the attack button over and over again. Then again, given how frequently you're forced to fight the same foes, whose most notable change is their palette and not, say, attack patterns or behavior, monotony would set in very quickly, even if the game's combat system was engaging, especially with the often excessive amount of enemies thrown your way. God of Thunder on the go is rendered incapable of presenting a challenge by how simple it is to stun like a group of enemies into submission from a distance, given the grand reach of Thor's hammer, and the knockbacks his rune causes for those that are close, or by trapping them in a corner by continually charging up Mjolnir. Even the bosses, grand as they may be in scale, aren't very difficult since their attacks are telegraphed in a remarkably obvious fashion that the only way to avoid winning against them is to never use the dodge button, which, given how little you'll be using it in the regular encounters, is hard to fault one for forgetting about it. Frankly, the most difficult part of the game comes from environmental hazards testing one's patience with how obnoxious they can be. Namely, with the amount of projectiles that continuously fall from the sky throughout a given level. There is variety in terms of their design, but the levels are severely lacking in quality control. There's one section where you're riding a rock downhill and fighting off more waves of the same enemies. However, said enemies continue to be pushovers with how effortlessly they can be tossed off that very same rock.
No! My sled!
Asgard will see to it that your kind are not welcome here. Away with you, filthy vermin! There are other modes besides the main campaign, but they all share the same problems as the main one, albeit with their own additional problems. Frostgrinder Assault consists of a single level, where the Warriors 3 are sent in to destroy orbs due to the events of the last few levels of the main game. And that's all there is to say about it because of how utterly forgettable it is. After beating the stage once, you can select different characters like Loki and Heimdall. However, all of them share the same simplistic combat as before, minus Thor's more useful abilities like Asgardian Pile Driver! The other additional mode is a survival mode, where Thor has to endure round after round of the game's various rogues. Given the aforementioned tedium of the main campaign, it's unsurprising that this mode makes for one mundane experience, given how standard and unimaginative a take it is on the scenario. There is a fourth mode to unlock, but to be frank, there's not much motivation to do so when the bulk of the game is a mercifully short bore. I'm not going to beat around the bush any longer. Thor feels incredibly unpolished, rushed to meet the deadline that was a few days before the movie's release date. It has the basic mechanics down that could have made for a fun, if mindless brawler, but it needed more time to fix the various flaws, like toning down the amount of foes the player has to face, along with the frequency with which foes are fought against, or how broken some of the runes can be. Credit where it's due, WayForward clearly put a good amount of effort into developing the game, which does show in the visuals. Thor is a stunning showcase on the DS that boasts some superb sprite work for the beautifully layered backgrounds of the realm and smooth animation for the various characters that occupy them. How unfortunate then that it's held back by frequent slowdown whenever the screen gets even slightly cluttered with the aforementioned countless foes. The enemies aren't the only part of the game to make regular appearances, since there's a notable amount of recycling of a single room during several stages, which doesn't lead to the most impressive level design when going through the same passage the fourth time in a row. It also has its share of bugs, crashing when loading up the level on one occasion, while another saw the sound effects for Thor taking a hit with the blow itself being completely muted with no way to fix it. Speaking of sound, the game's soundtrack can be best described as musical much unfit for the Game Boy Advance, which came as an especially grand surprise considering it was composed by Jake Kaufman.
Is Thor on the DS better than the 3DS or console version? Yes to both. Is it a good game? It's not quite there. Yeah, that's about right.
Much like the movie, Thor on the DS is not without merit, both boasting the occasionally impressive visuals and having more than enough good ideas that, while not often well executed, keep it from falling into the realm of being utterly disposable. However, the game lacks the ability to hit fast forward on the remote, resulting in many repetitive encounters that can't simply be skipped over in order to get to the good parts.
As far as comic book based beat 'em ups by WayForward are concerned, you're better off playing Batman the Brave and the Bold. Not to belabor a pun, but this game is not quite as mighty as the title would imply. So, that's disappointing. What do we have in store for tomorrow? Why didn't I just review the... Forget it. I'll see you all in 24 hours.